Never thought I would be sitting in my own kitchen, watching my daughter count the rooms in my house like she was already calculating square footage for a listing. But that's exactly what she was doing the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I'm Vivian. I'm 71 years old. I taught high school English for 32 years in Dayton, Ohio, and I have corrected enough student essays to know when someone is not telling me the whole truth. I know the difference between what someone says and what they mean. I have built that skill over decades of reading between the lines. I just never thought I would have to use it on my own daughter. My husband Gerald passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, and I would not wish those 11 weeks on anyone. When he died, I kept the house, our house, the one we bought in 1987, when the neighborhood was still mostly farmland, the one where we raised our 2 kids, where the back porch sags a little on the left side because Gerald always meant to fix it and never did. I kept it because it was mine, because it still smelled like him in the closet where his old flannel shirts hung, and I was not ready to let go of that. I managed on my own. People assumed I wouldn't. My son called from Denver every Sunday to check in, full of gentle hints about whether I'd thought about downsizing. My daughter, who lives 40 minutes away in Centerville, made a point of stopping by every couple of weeks to see how I was holding up. I appreciated that. I thought she was doing it out of love. She was, in the beginning. I believe that. I really do. The shift was so gradual that I almost didn't notice it. It started with small comments. "Mom, this house is so big for one person." Then, "Mom, the lawn is getting away from you, isn't it?" Then the winter I slipped on the icy back step. Didn't break anything, just bruised my hip, and suddenly every conversation began circling back to that one moment, as if a bruised hip at 70 was evidence that I could no longer be trusted to live alone. My daughter's name is Renee. She is 44 years old, and she married a man named Doug 12 years ago. Doug works in commercial real estate. I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters. Renee started bringing Doug to more of her visits. He would walk through the rooms while Renee and I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, and I could hear his footsteps going from room to room, slow and deliberate, the way someone walks through a space they are trying to understand structurally. I told myself he was just restless, that Doug was the kind of man who couldn't sit still. I found reasons to explain away things I was already, somewhere in the back of my mind, beginning to find troubling. The real conversation happened in January, a cold, gray Saturday, the kind of day that makes everything feel heavier than it is. Renee came alone that time. She brought a casserole, which she set on the counter, and then didn't mention again for the rest of the afternoon. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she had that look on her face, the careful, practiced look of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say. "Mom," she started, "Doug and I have been talking." I set down my coffee cup. "We've been really worried about you. You're out here alone, and the house is a lot to maintain. And honestly, and I say this because I love you, I don't think it's safe anymore for you to be here by yourself." I asked her what she was suggesting. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a printout, a floor plan, I realized. The floor plan of their house in Centerville, with a room highlighted in yellow, a room that shared a wall with the garage. She told me they had been thinking about converting it into a suite, a private space just for me, that I could sell this house and the money would help them finish the renovation, and I would be close to her, close to the grandchildren, not alone anymore. I looked at that yellow highlighted room for a long time. I said I would think about it. What I did not say, what I kept quiet and held close to my chest like a card I wasn't ready to play, was that I had immediately noticed 2 things about that piece of paper. The first was that the suite was barely 300 square feet. The second was that there was no separate entrance. I would be inside their house, accessible, dependent. and Doug worked in commercial real estate. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about it while I walked to the end of the driveway to get the mail. I thought about it while I watered the Christmas cactus on the windowsill that had belonged to Gerald's mother. I thought about it at my Thursday morning water box class, moving through the warm blue water alongside the women who had become my closest friends over the past 4 years. Patricia, who had lost her husband 2 years before Gerald, Ruth, who was 76 and sharper than most 50-year-olds I knew, Carol, who was a retired family law attorney and who on that particular Thursday I pulled aside after class and asked if she had 20 minutes to talk. Carol had more than 20 minutes. She sat with me for 2 hours in the cafe attached to the aquatic center, and she listened to everything I told her. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very calmly, "Vivian, what you're describing has a name. It's called financial elder abuse, and it is more common than you would believe, and it almost always comes from inside the family." She gave me the name of an elder law attorney, a colleague of hers from years ago, a woman named Patricia Ellison who practiced in downtown Dayton. She told me to call before I gave Renee any answer at all. She told me not to sign anything, not even something that looked minor, without having Patricia look at it first. I called Patricia Ellison the following Monday. In the meantime, I told Renee I was warming up to the idea. I said it carefully, without committing to specifics. I told her I understood their concern and that I was touched by the offer. I watched her face relax with relief, and something small and painful turned over in my chest because I could still see my daughter in that face, the little girl who used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from church, who brought me a clay pot she made in 5th grade that I still kept on the back porch. But I kept the feeling quiet. I had learned something in 32 years of teaching teenagers about the importance of not showing your hand too soon. Patricia Ellison was a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a directness that I found immediately comforting. She looked at the situation the way Carol had, without flinching, without trying to soften it into something easier to hear. She explained what my rights were. She explained what a revocable living trust was, and how it differed from simply having a will and what it could and could not protect. She explained the implications of adding anyone else's name to a deed or signing over power of attorney without careful safeguards in place. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Mrs. Kavanaugh, the most powerful thing you can do right now is nothing that looks like anything. You act cooperative, you go along, and while they think everything is proceeding on their timeline, we put protections in place on yours." I went home that day, and I sat on the back porch in the cold in my coat, looking at the yard Gerald had planted. The apple tree, the raised bed he built for my tomatoes, the bird feeder he hung from the maple the year we retired. I sat there for a long time, and I let myself feel every bit of the grief of what was happening, not just the threat to my house, but the knowledge that my daughter had looked at the life I had built and seen an asset to be liquidated, that her husband had walked through my rooms calculating their value. And then I went inside and I made dinner and I called Renee and I told her I was ready to start talking about next steps. She was delighted. Her voice was warm and eager in a way that made my stomach turn just slightly, but I kept my voice even and pleasant, the way I used to keep my voice even and pleasant when a student was trying to get away with something in class, when I already knew exactly what they were doing. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia and I set up a revocable living trust. My house, my savings, just under $220,000 in a combination of a money market account and the Roth IRA, and my Gerald's life insurance payout were all placed into the trust. The trust named me as the sole trustee while I was living and of sound mind. It named my son Michael as the successor trustee. I called Michael in Denver and I told him everything. He went very quiet on the phone. When he spoke again, his voice was tight and controlled in the way that told me he was angrier than he was letting on. He said, "Mom, whatever you need me to do." I told him to wait. I told him his time would come. I did not tell Renee about any of this. What I told Renee was that I was ready to move forward, that I had been thinking about it and I agreed the house was too much for me to manage alone. She and Doug came over on a Friday evening, and Doug had papers, preliminary documents, he called them, to get the process started, a real estate disclosure form, an agreement authorizing him to act as my listing agent. I looked at those papers for a long moment. Then I picked up the pen and I signed them. Renee put her hand over her mouth. She was so happy. Doug was smiling, the broad, satisfied smile of a man who has just closed a deal. They stayed for dinner. Doug opened a bottle of wine he had brought and he poured 3 glasses and he made a toast to new beginnings. And I raised my glass and I drank. That night after they left, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a while. I was not afraid. I want you to understand that. I was not afraid because I already knew what those papers actually authorized. A listing agreement with Doug's brokerage, but my home was in a trust that Doug could not touch without my explicit notarized consent as trustee. A disclosure form that disclosed nothing I had not approved. I had walked Patricia through every word before that evening. She had told me which ones were safe to sign and exactly why. They had my signature on papers that did not give them what they thought they had. While Renee was sending her friends photos of my house with excited captions about the renovation they were about to start, I was meeting with Patricia to formalize the next layer of protection. She filed the trust documents with the county recorder's office. She also helped me connect with Ohio's Adult Protective Services, where I made an informal report, not yet a formal complaint, but a documented record of what had transpired, in the words of the caseworker I spoke with. A protective intake. Patricia also put me in touch with an attorney who specialized in elder financial fraud. His name was Harrison, and he reviewed everything Doug had presented me with, and he made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "These documents," he said, "authorize a listing. They do not transfer ownership. Without a deed transfer, without your signature as trustee on the trust instrument, your property is completely beyond their reach." He paused. "Did they know about the trust?" I told him they did not. He nodded slowly. "Then they don't know they've already lost." February came. Renee called me several times to talk about staging the house, about a timeline, about whether I wanted to have an estate sale for some of the furniture. She was making plans out loud, and I listened and asked small questions and kept my voice warm and unhurried. And all the while, Patricia was quietly documenting every conversation I reported, building a timeline of events in case we needed it. In the 3rd week of February, Doug called to tell me he had a potential buyer, an investor, he said, who wanted to move quickly. He asked me to come into his office the following Thursday to sign the purchase agreement and formally authorize the transaction. I said I would be there. I did not go alone. Patricia and Harrison both accompanied me. I also asked Michael to fly in from Denver, and he did without Renee knowing. He drove to Patricia's office the night before, and I met him there, and he held my hands for a moment before we sat down, and I saw in his face what I had been trying not to let myself feel for weeks. The next morning, the 4 of us walked into Doug's office together. I still see the look on Doug's face when he looked up from behind his desk and saw who had walked in with me. The color changed in it. He stood up too quickly. He said something about not realizing I was bringing people. Patricia set her briefcase on the table and opened it. She explained in the measured and precise voice of someone who has done this before that my home was currently held in a revocable living trust, that the listing agreement Doug had presented was unenforceable without corresponding authorization from the trust instrument, and that no sale could proceed without my consent as trustee, which I was withdrawing, effective today. She then slid a letter across the desk. It was addressed to Doug's broker. It outlined the circumstances under which the listing agreement had been obtained. It requested the immediate termination of that agreement, and it notified his broker that copies of all documentation had been preserved and would be provided to the Ohio Division of Real Estate if necessary. Doug's face had done several things in a short span of time. He looked at me. I looked back at him. I did not say anything. I had waited a long time to be in this room, and I was not going to waste it on words. He said, and I think he was talking to himself as much as to me, "Vivian, this is not what we intended." I stood up. "I know exactly what you intended," I said. "That's why I'm standing here instead of in a 300 square foot room with no separate entrance." Michael put his hand on my shoulder. We left. Renee called me that afternoon. She was crying. She said she was sorry, that it had started with genuine concern, that she had not meant for it to go so far. I listened to all of it. I let her talk until she was finished. There was a part of me that believed her, the part that wanted to believe her, that still needed her to be the daughter I raised. I told her I needed time. Doug's real estate license was reviewed by the Ohio Division of Real Estate following a formal complaint that Harrison filed. The investigation took several months. During that time, I learned from the caseworker at Adult Protective Services that what had occurred met the state's definition of financial exploitation of an older adult, not just morally, but legally. It is a first-degree misdemeanor in Ohio, escalating to a felony based on the dollar value involved. The value of my home was involved. Doug received a formal censure. His license was placed on probationary status for 2 years. He was required to complete mandatory ethics training. The investor he claimed to have lined up was, it turned out, a business associate of his. The whole thing had been arranged before he had ever shown Renee's floor plan across my kitchen table. My son Michael helped me hire someone to finally fix the back porch step, the one that Gerald always meant to fix. We did it on a Saturday in early April, and afterward we sat out there with coffee, and Michael didn't say much, just sat with me the way Gerald used to sit with me on that same porch on Saturday mornings, not needing to fill the silence with anything. That was enough, more than enough. Renee and I have spoken since then. It is not the same, and I do not know if it will ever be the same, and I have stopped trying to decide how I feel about that. Some things break in ways that leave a scar rather than a clean healing, and I have learned in 71 years that naming the thing clearly is better than pretending the break didn't happen. I am still in my house. I go to water aerobics on Thursday mornings. I water Gerald's Christmas cactus. The apple tree bloomed this spring, pale pink, the same as every year, indifferent to everything that happened under its branches. What I want you to take from this, if you are a woman my age, if you are watching this from a house you built with someone you loved, is this: your independence is worth protecting. Legally, formally, with documents that have teeth. You do not have to be suspicious of everyone, but you should know what a revocable living trust is. You should know what financial elder abuse looks like, because it almost never announces itself. It arrives in casseroles and floor plans and the voices of people who love you and have started, somewhere along the way, to love what you have just a little more than they love you. Find yourself a Carol. Find yourself a Patricia. Make the calls before you need to. And if someone is trying to count your rooms while you're sitting in the kitchen, trust what you see. The thing about that casserole Renee brought the day she slid that floor plan across my table, she never mentioned it again. We never ate it. It sat on the counter the whole afternoon while she talked about square footage and my safety and how much easier everything would be. I think about that sometimes, how the casserole was the costume the conversation wore to seem like love. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I think it matters to name things accurately. When something is wrapped to look like one thing and it's actually another, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is see it clearly, not bitterly, clearly. There's a difference. What saved me wasn't luck. It wasn't Gerald watching over me from wherever he is, though I'll admit there were moments it felt that way. What saved me was a Thursday morning water aerobics class and a friend named Carol who had spent decades in family law and knew exactly what she was looking at when I described my situation. What saved me was that I picked up the phone and called Patricia Ellison before I gave anyone an answer. What saved me was that I did not mistake the discomfort of suspecting my own daughter for a reason to stop thinking clearly. That's the part I want you to sit with. If you're watching this and you're in a season of life where people around you have started making decisions about what's best for you without fully asking, the willingness to think clearly when everything in you wants to believe the best about someone you love, that takes something. It takes more than most people give it credit for. It's not coldness. It's not paranoia. It's the same quality that gets you through 32 years in a classroom, through raising two children, through watching a husband go from a diagnosis to a funeral in 11 weeks. It's the ability to stay present in the hard thing instead of looking away. Doug counted on me looking away. He had probably counted on that from the beginning, that I was old enough to be confused, tired enough to be grateful for help, lonely enough to be moved by the image of being close to family. He wasn't entirely wrong about any of those things. I was all of those things, some days. But I was also a woman who had been reading people for decades, and something in his footsteps moving through my rooms told me to pay attention. Renee made choices that hurt me. Doug made choices that were, in the end, prosecutable. And what followed for both of them was not punishment I arranged. It was simply the natural result of what they set in motion. You cannot build something on a foundation of taking from someone who trusted you and expect it to hold. It doesn't. It never does. The structure always reveals itself eventually, usually at the worst possible moment for the people who built it. What I want for anyone watching is simpler than revenge and more durable than anger. I want you to know your rights the way I wish I had known mine earlier. I want you to have a Patricia before you need one, a Carol you can pull aside after water aerobics and trust with the real version of what's happening. I want you to understand that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of the people you love. It is, in fact, the most honest thing you can do in a moment when love is being used as a lever. My house is still mine. The apple tree bloomed again this spring, and I am still, at 71, entirely capable of deciding what happens under my own roof. That turned out to matter more than I can say.